The wind howled through the empty streets, whipping icy flakes against the boy's face. His arms ached, his legs burned, but he refused to stop. He clutched the two newborns tightly, shielding them as best as he could with the thin, tattered blanket wrapped around their tiny bodies. The babies whimpered, their cries barely audible over the raging storm. He had to keep going. Through the blinding snow, the boy finally saw it, a massive iron gate, its black bars stretching high into the night sky. Beyond it stood a mansion, its windows glowing faintly with warm light. He had never seen a house so big before, but now was not the time for hesitation. This was his only hope. With the last of his strength, he stumbled to the gate and banged his frozen fists against the metal. "Please," he shouted, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Somebody, please help us." For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing but the roar of the storm. Then, deep within the house, a light flickered on. Footsteps. Inside the grand mansion, a man sat in a luxurious leather chair, swirling a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was used to peace, to solitude. His life was measured in figures and transactions, not in unexpected visitors. When he first heard the sound, he frowned, setting his glass down. Who in their right mind would be out in this weather? With a sigh, he pushed himself up and made his way toward the door. He was prepared to send whoever it was away. But the moment he swung it open, the sight before him froze him in place. A boy, no older than 10, stood there, his face pale as death, his lips trembling. In his arms, wrapped in nothing but thin rags, were two newborn babies. Their tiny faces were red from the cold, their little hands limp against the bitter night air. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a shaking breath, the boy looked up at the billionaire with wide, desperate eyes. His voice was barely a whisper, but the words he spoke made the man's heart stop. "They're not normal babies, and I wasn't supposed to be here." The billionaire stood frozen in the doorway, the freezing wind biting at his face. The boy's words echoed in his mind. Not normal babies? His eyes flickered to the tiny bundles in the boy's trembling arms. Their skin was ice-cold, their breaths shallow. Whatever the boy meant would have to wait, these infants wouldn't survive much longer in the cold. "Get inside," the billionaire ordered, stepping aside. The boy hesitated, his wide eyes scanning the darkness behind him. He looked as if he expected someone, or something, to appear at any moment. Then, clutching the babies tighter, he stumbled forward, nearly collapsing onto the marble floor of the mansion's grand foyer. The billionaire shut the heavy door with a firm click, sealing out the howling storm. Warmth enveloped them immediately, and the boy exhaled in relief. "Come here." The billionaire moved swiftly, taking charge. He grabbed a thick blanket from a nearby couch and gently wrapped it around the infants, careful not to jostle them. Then he turned to the boy, who stood there shivering, his thin clothes soaked through. "Sit by the fire." He gestured toward the grand fireplace that crackled in the center of the room. The boy obeyed, inching toward the warmth but refusing to let go of the babies. His small hands, red and raw from the cold, held them with fierce protectiveness. The billionaire knelt beside him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Where did you come from?" The boy lowered his gaze, his lips pressing into a tight line. "I can't say." The billionaire frowned. "You show up at my doorstep, in the middle of a blizzard, carrying two babies. You say they're not normal and that you weren't supposed to be here. And now, you expect me to accept that without an explanation?" The boy flinched at the sharpness in his tone. "Look, kid," the billionaire sighed, trying again. "I need to know what's going on if I'm going to help you." The boy hesitated, then nodded. He swallowed hard, then finally spoke. They need to be kept safe. They can't go back." "Back where?" "Where they were born," the boy whispered. The billionaire studied him carefully. The way the boy spoke, his fear, his urgency, this wasn't just a runaway child. Something was very, very wrong. Then, the boy reached into his pocket. "I wasn't supposed to take them," he murmured. "But I had no choice." Slowly, he pulled out a small object and opened his hand. The billionaire's breath caught. In the boy's palm lay a small, glowing crystal. The light pulsed faintly, illuminating the boy's pale skin with an eerie blue hue. The billionaire had never seen anything like it before. "What is that?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Before the boy could answer, the mansion's lights flickered. Then, the security alarm blared. The billionaire turned sharply toward the front door, his gut tightening. Outside, shadows moved through the storm. Figures in dark suits, their silhouettes barely visible through the swirling snow. The boy's face drained of color. "They found us," he whispered. The billionaire's heart pounded as he turned toward the security monitor on the wall. The camera feeds flickered, struggling against the storm's interference, but the images were clear enough. There were at least 6 figures outside, moving with eerie precision toward the mansion. They weren't just lost travelers. They were hunting for something. Or someone. The boy clutched the twins tighter, his entire body trembling, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror. "You can't let them in," he whispered. "Please. If they get inside, we won't make it out." The billionaire didn't like being told what to do in his own house. But something in the boy's eyes, pure, desperate fear, made him pause. "Who are they?" the billionaire asked, his voice low. The boy shook his head. "They're the ones who own them," he said, glancing at the sleeping babies. "They won't stop until they take them back." A heavy boom echoed through the house. The front gate. The billionaire's security system was state-of-the-art, but that kind of force meant these people weren't just knocking. They were ready to break in. The billionaire clenched his jaw. This was no ordinary situation. He grabbed a nearby remote and pressed a button. Metal shutters slammed down over the mansion's windows. The front gate's reinforced locks engaged. The alarm system switched to its highest setting. Outside, the figures stopped moving. They knew he was locking them out. A voice crackled through the intercom, one of the security guards stationed outside. "Sir, we have a situation." "I see them," the billionaire replied, his voice sharp. "Who are they?" "That's the problem," the guard said. "They're not showing up on any of our ID scans. No fingerprints. No facial recognition. It's like they don't exist." The billionaire's stomach turned. Then, another voice came through the intercom, only this one wasn't from his security team. "Open the door," the voice ordered. It was deep, unnervingly calm. The billionaire looked at the screen. One of the figures had stepped closer to the security camera. Though his face was shadowed, his eyes were sharp, too sharp. Almost inhuman. "We know you have the children," the man continued. "This does not concern you. Hand them over, and we will leave." The boy's grip on the babies tightened. "No," he whispered. "You can't." The billionaire's hands curled into fists. He didn't know what was going on, but he wasn't about to hand over 2 helpless infants to a group of strangers demanding them in the middle of a blizzard. "I don't know what you're talking about," the billionaire said coolly. "You're trespassing. Leave now, or I call the authorities." A long pause. Then, the man outside spoke again. "There will be no authorities." The intercom cut out. And then, boom. The entire house shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sound of splintering wood and twisting metal filled the air. The billionaire spun toward the security monitor. The front doors had blown apart. A thick cloud of smoke filled the entrance hall. The security shutters had held, until now. These people weren't just armed. They had firepower. The billionaire turned to the boy. "We need to move. Now." The boy nodded quickly, standing up while cradling the babies. His legs wobbled, but he forced himself to stay upright. The billionaire grabbed a hidden panel near the bookshelf and pressed a code into it. A hidden door slid open. "This way." The boy rushed inside, the billionaire right behind him. As the door sealed shut behind them, voices echoed through the mansion, cold, methodical, and getting closer. And then, the billionaire heard something that sent chills down his spine. One of the intruders spoke, their voice sharp and calculating. "The children must be retrieved. Kill anyone who resists." The billionaire's blood ran cold. Who were these people? And what exactly had he just gotten himself into? The billionaire and the boy sprinted through the hidden passageways, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The mansion's vast corridors stretched endlessly before them, but the billionaire knew the quickest way to the panic room would be through the old, underground tunnels. Behind them, the distant sound of boots stomping on marble grew louder. The intruders were closing in. "You have to keep up," the billionaire urged, but the boy was already ahead of him, moving quickly despite his fear. The babies in his arms remained eerily quiet, as if the chaos around them hadn't reached their tiny worlds. The boy glanced back at him, his expression hardening. "They're coming," he said, breathless. "They'll be here any minute." The billionaire's mind raced. Who were these people? And why did they want the babies so badly? What was so special about them that they were worth risking everything? The boy's eyes flicked to the babies. "They're not human," he murmured. The billionaire froze. "What?" The boy's face was filled with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "The twins. They were never meant to be born. They're different. And powerful. They don't belong to anyone." The billionaire's mind struggled to process the boy's words. Different? Powerful? These were just infants, helpless and fragile. How could they be anything but human? But then, the boy's next words shattered his doubt. "They can do things, impossible things." The billionaire's heart skipped a beat. "Like what?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting nervously to the babies, as if afraid they might hear him. "Things I don't understand. But I've seen it. I've seen them do things no one should be able to." Just then, they rounded a corner and reached a thick metal door. The boy quickly typed in a series of numbers on the keypad, and the door slid open with a heavy, mechanical hiss. They rushed inside, and the boy locked the door behind them. The panic room was small but well-equipped, with reinforced walls and surveillance monitors. The boy immediately turned to the babies, checking their blankets. They still hadn't made a sound. The billionaire couldn't stop himself from asking, "What can they do?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "One of them, she can make things move with her mind. And the other, he can heal people. Fix things that should be broken." The billionaire stared at him. "How old are they?" "A few weeks. But they've been alive longer than that." The billionaire's mind raced. "You mean, they weren't born in the normal way?" The boy shook his head. "No. They were created. In a lab. And now those people, they want them back." Suddenly, a harsh noise cut through the air, a metallic screech, followed by another loud bang. The mansion shook again, and the sound of explosions echoed from somewhere far off. "They're inside," the boy said, his voice shaking. The billionaire's chest tightened. "We don't have much time. We have to get out of here." As he turned to the control panel to monitor the situation, his eyes locked onto the babies once more. Something about the way they lay there, silent and still, filled him with an inexplicable sense of dread. The boy had said they were different. Now, he was starting to believe it. From the corner of the room, the boy spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. I never wanted this. I just wanted to protect them. But now, they're the key to something bigger than both of us. Something dangerous. Before the billionaire could respond, he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching the panic room. And then came a voice. We know you're in there. The billionaire's blood ran cold. It was the same voice he'd heard over the intercom earlier, only now it was much closer. The boy's eyes widened in panic. They've found us. The billionaire didn't hesitate. He moved to the emergency exit, his mind racing. We need to get out. Now. He grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him toward the hidden exit, the metal doors sliding open just as another explosion rocked the mansion. They were running out of time. But as they dashed into the next passage, the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just being hunted for the babies. There was something bigger going on, something that would change everything. The tunnel was narrow and cold, the walls pressing in on them as they ran. The sound of explosions was growing louder, each blast shaking the ground beneath their feet. The billionaire felt his heart pounding in his chest, every step more desperate than the last. The boy was ahead, clutching the babies to his chest, his eyes scanning the dark tunnel for any sign of danger. The billionaire could barely keep up, his legs burning from the strain, but he pushed himself harder. Where does this tunnel lead? The billionaire gasped. The boy didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the darkness ahead, his eyes filled with urgency. To a safe house. A place no one knows about. But we have to hurry. The billionaire wasn't sure he believed him. A safe house? How could he be sure? The boy had been telling him a story filled with impossible truths, but what if this was all a trap? What if the boy wasn't who he said he was? But there was no time for doubts. The pursuit was closing in. They reached a hidden door at the end of the tunnel. The boy typed in a code, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. They stepped into a dimly lit room, filled with equipment and supplies. Stay here, the boy said, his voice low and urgent. I'm going to check the perimeter. The billionaire nodded, but his mind was racing. The boy had been oddly secretive about his past. Who was he really? Why had he shown up at the billionaire's mansion with two mysterious babies? And why had the boy said they weren't human? Before he could ask more questions, the sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel. Someone was coming. The billionaire turned to see one of his trusted employees, a man who'd worked for him for years, step into the room. Sir, the employee said, his voice calm but with an underlying tension. You need to come with me. It's not safe here. The billionaire's instincts flared. Something about the man's tone wasn't right. He was too calm, too collected. I've already made arrangements, the billionaire said, his hand instinctively reaching for the emergency radio on his belt. I'm not going anywhere with you. The employee didn't seem fazed. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand, sir. They're coming, and if we don't act now. He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, he lunged forward, pulling out a small device and activating it with a click. A bright light filled the room, blinding the billionaire for a split second. Before he could react, a loud bang echoed through the walls, followed by a blast of energy that sent the billionaire stumbling backward. He barely managed to regain his footing, his heart racing as the employee's face twisted into a cold, calculating grin. You shouldn't have trusted me, the man said, his voice dripping with venom. I never liked you, billionaire. But I've always had my orders. The billionaire's mind raced. The man had betrayed him. He'd led them right into the hands of the pursuers. In a panic, the billionaire reached for the nearest weapon, a heavy metal pipe, and swung it at the employee. The blow landed with a loud crash, knocking the man off balance. But before the billionaire could follow through, the employee activated another device, and the room flooded with gas, causing the billionaire to collapse, gasping for air. The last thing he saw before darkness took over was the boy, his face a mix of shock and regret, rushing toward him. When the billionaire woke up, the world was spinning. His head felt like it was being crushed under 1,000 pounds of pressure, and his vision was blurred. He forced himself to focus, trying to push through the fog in his mind. "Where are the babies?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. The boy was kneeling beside him, his face pale with worry. "They're safe, for now." The billionaire blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The room was dimly lit, the walls rough and unfamiliar. He realized they were no longer in the safe house. The tunnel had been a trap, and now they were somewhere far worse. "I should have known," the billionaire whispered, his voice laced with regret. "I should have seen it coming." The boy nodded, his expression grim. "He's one of them. One of the people who want the babies. He betrayed us, and now they'll be coming for you, too." The billionaire's heart sank. What do they want with the twins? Why are they hunting them? The boy looked away, unable to answer. But as the billionaire sat up, he noticed something strange. The babies, who had been completely still before, were now glowing faintly. A soft hum filled the air, vibrating in his chest. The boy's eyes widened. "This is it. They're waking up." The billionaire took a deep breath, realizing something even more chilling. This wasn't just about the babies anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the entire world. And now, they had no choice but to fight back. The billionaire's mind was spinning, his thoughts racing faster than he could keep up with. Betrayal had come from the most unexpected source. His trusted employee, the one person he thought would never turn on him, had been working against him all along. The boy was still watching him, his face a mix of concern and something else, something the billionaire couldn't quite place. "They're coming," the boy muttered, his eyes darting to the door as the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. "We need to move, now." The billionaire's head was pounding, but he nodded, pushing himself to his feet. He wasn't sure where they were or what had happened, but one thing was clear: they couldn't stay here. The people hunting them were relentless, and the boy's warning echoed in his mind: "They're not human." His pulse quickened as he glanced around the small room. It looked like some kind of abandoned facility, walls cracked, dust gathering in the corners. It was far from the luxurious mansion he was used to, but it was the only place that felt even remotely safe. "Where's the way out?" he asked, trying to steady his breath. The boy pointed to a metal door at the far end of the room. "We'll have to take the tunnels again." The billionaire didn't hesitate. He moved toward the door, but something caught his eye. A strange scar on the boy's wrist, small but distinct. It looked eerily familiar. Before he could speak, the boy caught him looking and quickly covered his arm. "What is it?" the billionaire asked, his voice sharp with curiosity. The boy hesitated. "It's nothing," he muttered, his tone uneasy. "We don't have time." But the billionaire wasn't convinced. The scar. It was identical to the small mark on the baby's wrists. There was no way that was a coincidence. Suddenly, the boy's eyes flicked to his arm. The billionaire followed his gaze. A scar, hidden for years, seemed to throb in response to the boy's presence. It was an old scar, faint but unmistakable. The memories flooded back. The scar. The billionaire had gotten it as a child, during a strange event he'd nearly forgotten. The night he had nearly drowned in a lake, saved by someone who had appeared out of nowhere. The person had had the same mark on their wrist. The realization hit him like a wave. Could he be connected to the twins? Could the boy have come to him for a reason he hadn't yet understood? Before he could ask more, the sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere nearby. He snapped out of his thoughts, refocusing on the present. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Let's go," he said, his voice urgent. The boy nodded, his eyes still filled with uncertainty. They raced through the narrow hallways of the facility, moving as fast as they could, knowing that every second counted. The deeper they went, the more the billionaire began to feel a strange sense of déjà vu. He knew these tunnels, he recognized the layout. He'd been here before. They reached a door that led to an underground parking garage. It was empty, the place eerily quiet except for the echo of their footsteps. But the moment the billionaire stepped inside, he froze. The faintest sound of breathing, a presence behind him. He turned to face the boy, only to see him gone. For a split second, the billionaire felt panic rise in his chest. Had the boy betrayed him? Had he led him into yet another trap? But as he scanned the garage, his eyes landed on something that made his blood run cold. A black vehicle, parked in the far corner, its windows tinted so dark they could have been hiding anything, or anyone. The billionaire approached cautiously, his instinct screaming at him to turn and run. But something about the vehicle, something about the scene, felt too familiar. He reached the vehicle and hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Inside, he found a familiar face. His old friend, the one who had promised to help them escape, was slumped in the seat, unconscious but alive. The billionaire felt his heart drop into his stomach. This wasn't the safe house he'd thought it was. This was another part of the game, and he'd been playing right into it. The boy wasn't the only one with secrets. The pieces of his past were falling into place, each new discovery more unsettling than the last. How long had this been planned? The boy, the babies, the scar, everything was connected. But how? A voice crackled in his earpiece, bringing him back to reality. "We've found them. They're in the facility." It was the voice of one of his remaining employees, someone still loyal to him. "We've got one shot at this," the billionaire said, determination seeping into his voice. "Get me out of here, and don't leave anything behind." They made their way out of the garage, avoiding the chaos that had erupted outside. The night was still dark, but the tension in the air was palpable. The billionaire's thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. As they reached the vehicle and began their escape, the boy reappeared at the back of the car, his eyes filled with something the billionaire couldn't quite place. "Are you okay?" the billionaire asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small glowing object he had shown the billionaire earlier. For a moment, it hummed in his hand, a soft light flickering from within. "It's time," the boy said quietly, as the car sped into the night. The billionaire glanced at the object and then back at the boy. Whatever it was, whatever had been set in motion, they were heading towards something bigger than either of them had anticipated. The chill of the night air bit at their skin as the car raced through the dark, desolate landscape. The snowstorm still raged, but it seemed a distant concern compared to what loomed ahead. The road was deserted, but the silence felt like a warning, a pause before something far worse would arrive. The boy sat at the back of the vehicle, his gaze locked on the glowing object in his hand. The soft light emanating from it pulsed in time with the rhythm of his breathing. The billionaire, his knuckles white against the steering wheel, couldn't shake the feeling that they were driving straight into danger, faster than they could ever escape. "Where are we going?" he finally asked, his voice low and filled with dread. The boy didn't answer immediately. His eyes were focused on the object, the light flickering more erratically now. It was as though it were calling to him, or perhaps to something else entirely. "We have to go to the old facility," the boy said quietly. His words carried an air of finality. "It's the only place where we can hide long enough to figure out what's going on." The billionaire's heart skipped a beat. The old facility? He remembered it now, another facility, one he'd thought abandoned for years. It was far more secure than anything he owned, a fortress hidden deep in the mountains. But why would the boy want to go there? What was it about that place that could protect them? I don't understand, the billionaire muttered, glancing at the rearview mirror to ensure they weren't being followed. The roads were empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was closing in on them. What's at this facility? What's so special about it? The boy turned his gaze to him, his eyes dark with an unreadable emotion. You'll understand soon enough, he said. It's time you knew everything. A heavy silence filled the car, punctuated only by the sound of the snowstorm crashing against the windshield. They didn't speak again until the massive gates of the facility came into view, their iron structure looming in the distance like a giant guarding something precious, something deadly. The billionaire pulled up to the gates, his breath catching in his throat as he realized just how much they were about to risk. This wasn't just an escape anymore. This was a confrontation. Without a word, the boy opened the door and stepped out, holding the glowing object tightly in his hand. The billionaire followed, his mind racing with questions, but his instinct screaming at him to move quickly. They entered the facility, the cold air biting into their skin as they made their way through the labyrinth of hallways. The boy seemed to know exactly where to go, moving with purpose and precision. Where are we going? The billionaire asked, his voice barely above a whisper. To the heart of the facility, the boy replied. To the place where it all started. They reached a massive door at the end of a long hallway. The boy stopped, his hand hovering over a keypad. He punched in a series of numbers, and the door slowly creaked open. Inside, the billionaire's breath caught in his throat. The room was filled with rows of equipment, monitors flashing with data, and at the center, an enormous machine. It looked alien, a mix of high-tech machinery and strange symbols etched into the surface. This is it, the boy said, his voice filled with reverence and fear. This is where they were born. The billionaire's eyes widened. The twins? The boy nodded. Yes. And it's why they're after them. Why they're after us. This machine, it was designed to bring them into the world. To give them power. The billionaire's mind reeled as he pieced the information together. The twins weren't just innocent children, they were part of something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. As the boy stepped forward, placing the glowing object onto a pedestal in the center of the room, the entire facility seemed to shudder. The ground beneath them vibrated, and the lights flickered. The machine hummed to life. A voice, low, robotic, and cold, echoed through the room. Intruders detected. Initiating lockdown. Get down, the boy yelled, grabbing the billionaire's arm and pulling him away from the machine. The billionaire's heart pounded in his chest as alarms blared. The walls began to close in, the entire facility locking itself down. They're here, the boy said, panic creeping into his voice. We have to fight. Suddenly, the doors to the facility exploded inward, and a team of armed figures, clad in dark, tactical gear, stormed in, guns raised. The pursuers had arrived, and they weren't here to negotiate. The billionaire's mind raced. He had money, power, resources, yet none of it had prepared him for this moment. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But in that instant, he knew he had no choice. Move, he shouted, shoving the boy behind him as he reached for a nearby weapon, one of the old rifles stored in the facility's armory. They weren't going down without a fight. The room exploded into chaos as the billionaire and the boy fought back, but the pursuers were relentless. They moved with precision, each one a trained professional. Every bullet fired, every move made, was calculated. The billionaire's heart raced, the fight instinctively pulling him into a rhythm he didn't know he had. He was far from invincible, but his desperation fueled his every action. At the center of it all, the boy stood beside the glowing pedestal, hands outstretched toward the machine. The light from the object in his hand was now blinding, and the hum of the machine grew louder, more insistent. The pursuers kept coming, their presence closing in. With each passing second, the room seemed smaller, the stakes higher. But there was a shift, a subtle change in the air. The machine, powered by the boy's object, began to respond. Its hum intensified, and something strange happened. The energy in the room seemed to bend. The boy's voice rang out above the noise. "It's time. We can't fight them all. We have to escape." Before the billionaire could process the full weight of the boy's words, the machine released a blinding flash of light, and the entire facility seemed to implode in on itself. A deafening silence followed. The billionaire was thrown to the ground, his body aching from the shockwave. The boy's hand was still raised, the glowing object now silent in his grip. And then, the impossible happened. The pursuers, those who had hunted them, were gone. The boy collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily. The billionaire slowly stood up, heart still pounding, his mind struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had just occurred. The silence that followed the explosion was suffocating. The billionaire's ears rang, and his head spun as he tried to regain his bearings. Dust and debris filled the air, and the world felt distant, unreal. His body ached from the force of the blast, and his mind raced to process what had just happened. The boy was lying on the floor, struggling to breathe. His face was pale, his body trembling, but his eyes were wide with a mix of fear and relief. What happened?" the billionaire gasped, stumbling over to the boy's side. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The entire facility had been wiped out in an instant, the pursuers vanquished, but the cost had been heavy. The boy turned his head weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "It worked, but I'm not sure how long I can keep it up." The billionaire's heart clenched in his chest. He had no idea what the boy had done, but it was clear that whatever power he had just unleashed was draining him. The boy had sacrificed something crucial, to protect them all. "No," the billionaire muttered, kneeling beside him. "You need to rest. Let me help you." But the boy shook his head, his gaze focused on the glowing object, now dim in his hand. "It's too late for me." His voice was strained, and his breathing became more labored with each passing second. "But you still have a chance." The billionaire felt a pang of fear twist in his stomach. "What do you mean? What's happening?" The boy's eyes flickered, his pupils dilating as though he were seeing something far beyond the present moment. "The power I used, it's not something I can control forever. It was meant for something else, something much bigger than me. What do you need?" The billionaire's voice was urgent, filled with desperation. The boy smiled faintly, his lips trembling. "You don't have much time. The twins, protect them. They are the key to everything. They are our future." The billionaire's mind raced, trying to process the boy's words. The twins were the key. But to what? And why did the boy speak as if he knew this was his end? The boy's hand faltered, and the glowing object slipped from his grasp, falling to the ground with a soft thud. The last remnants of light flickered out, leaving them in darkness. "No," the billionaire cried, reaching out to him, but it was too late. The boy's body went limp in his arms, and the breath that had fought so desperately to stay in his lungs finally left him. A wave of sorrow and helplessness washed over the billionaire. This child, who had come to him in the middle of a storm with two innocent babies in tow, had given everything to protect them. He had sacrificed his life, his energy, and his future so that they could have a chance at survival. The billionaire gently placed the boy's body on the ground, his hands trembling. He didn't have the answers. He didn't know how to protect the twins, how to fulfill the boy's final wish. But there was no time to mourn. He stood up, his resolve hardening. The enemies were gone for now, but the threat still lingered. The twins were the key, but to what end? The billion-dollar questions swirled in his mind, unanswered. With a deep breath, he turned to the twins, who had been silent through all the chaos. The boy's words echoed in his mind. Protect them. The twins lay there, nestled in their blankets, their tiny forms vulnerable yet somehow carrying the weight of the future. The billionaire could see it now, what the boy had meant. The twins weren't just children. They were something more, something beyond his understanding. He carefully scooped them up, one in each arm, his heart heavy with the burden he had just inherited. The boy had given him everything, his life, his strength, his hope. The billionaire had to make sure it wasn't in vain. He walked out of the destroyed facility, the cold air biting at his skin as he moved forward, determined. The boy had warned him. There wasn't much time. But as long as he had breath in his body, as long as he had the strength to carry on, he would do whatever it took to protect the twins. No matter the cost. As he stepped outside into the falling snow, the wind howled, swirling around him like an angry specter. The world was eerily quiet, the storm's fury masking the haunting realization that nothing would ever be the same again. The billionaire glanced around, knowing the storm was far from over. He could feel it in his bones. The war, the secrets, and the answers were all waiting for him to uncover. But first, he needed to find a way to keep the twins safe. He needed to hide them from those who would stop at nothing to get their hands on them. He began to walk through the snow, the storm still raging around him, his thoughts dark with the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: he had to protect these children. The boy had given him a new purpose, a mission that would require every ounce of his power, every resource at his disposal. He would fight, he would protect, and in the end, he would uncover the truth about the twins and the power they held. The billionaire sat in the dimly lit room, the twins cradled gently in his arms. The soft flicker of a dying fire cast long shadows across the walls, but it did nothing to ease the heavy weight in his chest. The boy's sacrifice, the relentless danger, and the burden of the twins' future all seemed to crash down on him at once. He could still hear the boy's words echoing in his mind: protect them. They are the key to everything. But what did that mean? And why him? The boy had given up everything, his life, his future, his very existence, just so that these innocent children could survive. The billionaire knew the stakes had never been higher, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. Yet, there was no turning back now. The mansion, once a symbol of his wealth and isolation, now felt like a sanctuary. But even here, surrounded by luxury and security, he knew it wouldn't be enough. He had to do more. He had to be more. He glanced down at the twins. Their tiny faces were so innocent, so fragile. They had no idea what had been done for them, or what would come next. They were just children, but the power they held was beyond comprehension. He had seen it, he had witnessed the impossible, and now he had no choice but to protect them with everything he had. The door to the room creaked open, and the billionaire turned. His trusted ally, a former military officer who had helped him during the escape, stepped inside. "They're safe for now," the officer said softly, his face grim. "But we can't stay here forever. The storm is over, but the danger is just beginning." The billionaire nodded. He knew the officer was right. Staying here would only draw attention. They had to move, but the question was, where? He looked back down at the twins, their soft breathing almost comforting amidst the chaos. His thoughts wandered back to the boy, the one who had given his life so that they might have a chance at survival. "I can't do this alone," the billionaire said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "I need you. We need to protect them. They are the future, but I don't know how." The officer didn't speak at first. He simply stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the billionaire's. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "We'll figure it out. But we have to act fast. You saw what happened at the research facility. They're not giving up." The billionaire stood, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll fight. We'll keep moving, keep protecting them until we figure out what this all means." For the first time since the storm had begun, he felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something more important now. He had a purpose. He turned to the officer. "We can't just hide. We need to understand who they are, what they're capable of. And we need to find out who's behind this." The officer nodded, his expression grave. "It's not just about survival anymore. It's about uncovering the truth. And I'll be with you every step of the way." The billionaire's heart swelled with gratitude. The boy's sacrifice had sparked something in him, something he couldn't ignore. He was no longer the isolated billionaire obsessed with wealth and power. He had a responsibility now, and he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. The twins stirred in his arms, their tiny hands reaching out, almost as though they understood. He looked down at them, a new understanding dawning on him. They were innocent, yes. But they were also powerful. They had a purpose, and it was up to him to figure out what that purpose was. He took a deep breath and made a decision. "We're going to raise them in secret. They'll be safe with us. And we'll uncover the truth. We'll protect them, no matter what." The officer placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." The billionaire looked out the window, his gaze lost in the swirling snow outside. The world had changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. The boy had shown him a new path, and though the journey ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: he would do whatever it took to protect these children, to protect the future they held in their tiny hands. As the days passed, the billionaire's life began to transform. The mansion, once a symbol of his solitary existence, became a fortress, a place of refuge, but also a place of learning. He delved into every piece of information he could find about the twins, about their origins, and about the powers they possessed. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about understanding what had brought them into this world, and what their future held. He found himself growing closer to the twins, bonding with them in ways he never thought possible. They were more than just children, they were a mission, a purpose. And as they grew, so did his understanding of the world around him. But it wasn't just the twins who were changing him. The billionaire began to see the world through a new lens. The wealth he had once coveted now seemed meaningless in the face of what truly mattered: life, innocence, and the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. He had spent so much of his life chasing power, accumulating wealth, and building walls around himself. But now, he understood that the true measure of a person wasn't in what they owned, but in what they were willing to protect. The billionaire had found a new path, a path of redemption, of responsibility, and of love. And as he looked down at the twins, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would face it with them by his side. And so, they began a new life, a life of secrecy, of discovery, and of hope. The billionaire had learned that sometimes, the greatest treasures weren't riches or power, but the lives we choose to protect.